Members, we have a quorum. It's also time. I call to order the meeting of the panel. Item 1 on the agenda. PWP Item number 5019GB. Liantang, Heung, Yuen boundary control point and associated works, site formation and infrastructure works. Now we will invite the administration into the room. Thank you. I need to make a declaration. In the area where the works project covers, I own land there. First of all, I would like to welcome the representatives from the administration attending the meeting. The name list is already tabled, so I'm not going to go through the attendance list. First of all, can I invite the administration to give a brief introduction on the item? The administration will be making use of a PowerPoint for the presentation, so please try to be brief. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. For the Liantang, Heung, Yuen boundary control point, BCP and associated works, in July 2012, the Finance Committee approved the project estimate 16.2532 billion is for the construction of for part of the BCP project. Now this is to link up Hong Kong with Shenzhen. It will help to enhance the traffic network in the northern part of Hong Kong, of the new territories in particular. And it will bring about long-term benefits to Hong Kong. Now, after the approval of the APE, we have started tendering for the project. In April 2013, we started the works in phases. All went quite well, but then for the overall tender price is higher than expected. The APE is not sufficient to cover the rest of the project costs. So, having reviewed the overall financial position of the entire project, we believe there is a need to increase the APE by to some $24.8032 million. That is an increase of $8.55 billion. Now, we have already done a detailed and technical professional analysis of works already started. Perhaps I could invite my colleagues to give you a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you. Let me briefly walk members through the project 19GB, that is the proposed increase of the approved project estimate, APE. Now, Liantang, Heung, Yuen is in Cha Koo Leng. It will be the new boundary control point for Hong Kong. There will be a direct link, cross-boundary link between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. It will help to relieve the congestion in other BCPs. This project covers site formation about 23 hectares of land for the BCP. There will be an 11-kilometer long dual two-lane connecting road with about 1 kilometer of at-grade road, 4.3 kilometers of viaduct, and 5.7 kilometers of tunnel. There will also be 4 vehicular bridges and 1 pedestrian bridge. These are all cross-boundary bridges. In July 2012, the project was given a go-ahead by the Finance Committee. There are to be 6 contracts starting from the north to the south, to the farthest south. That's the contract 3, the Fanling Highway interchange, and then contract 2, connecting road between Fanling Highway and Shuttlecock Road. Contract 4, the traffic control and monitoring system. Contract 6, connecting road between Sha Tau Court Road and the BCP, and Contract 5, site formation of BCP. And as I said, Contract 4 is the traffic control and monitoring system. For Contracts 3, 2, and 5, works are in progress. For Contract 6, the tender has been received, the tenders are being assessed. For Contract 4, we'll be inviting tender in 2014. Here we can see the progress of the site formation works for this BCP. You can see works are in progress. This is where the Shenzhen BCP will be. And here, that's the Shenzhen River. For contracts 5 and 6, originally they were Contract 1. But the return tender price of Contract 1 far exceeded our estimate. To protect public revenue, we have therefore cancelled Contract 1, and Contract 1 has been split into 2 contracts. And then we retendered the contracts. So that we could increase the number of tenderers and therefore competition, and that will help to bring down prices. And we've also incorporated a series of measures, cost-saving measures, that includes inviting alternative designs. So tenderers can submit a more competitive tender price for better utilization of their resources and expertise. We also provide a barging point to facilitate the delivery of precast bridge deck segments. We also provide more working areas for the contractors' use, so there could be more efficient works. And also, we will review the designs by taking account feedback from the tenderers. We also provide detailed site investigation information and analysis reports to tenderers, so that will help to reduce the risk of tunneling and ground works. Now, we have taken these measures. Still, the return tender price exceeded the original APE. So we've reviewed the entire contract and the tendering results, and we believe there is a need to increase the APE by $8.55 billion from $16.2532 billion to $24.8032 billion. Now, there's a need to increase the prices for 3 reasons. First, for the viaduct, tunneling works, and electrical and mechanical works, project costs have surged substantially. And 2, the ground condition is worse than expected. And 3, the tenderers have taken into account higher risks than originally anticipated for the works. Because of these factors, and because of the increase in the construction cost, there is a need to increase the price adjustment provision correspondingly. Now, in 2012, when we applied for funding, we made reference to the tender price for similar infrastructure projects. We also had regard to data available at the time in estimating the project cost. But after 2012, project costs have surged, and such costs have been surging. That's especially the case for heavy civil engineering works. In relation to viaduct and tunnels, the costs for such works have gone up substantially. And also the return tender price is higher than expected. In 2012, starting from mid-2012, from government statistics, we know that for construction workers, their wages have gone up more than expected. For example, for viaduct works, starting from mid-2012, the wages of workers involved in such works have gone up from 18% to 46% on a average daily wage basis. And there's similar increase for other workers for tunneling works. And starting from mid-2012, heavy machineries for works have also gone up in price substantially. For example, the crawler cranes, plant for borrowed piling, rental hiring rates have gone up some 30 to 40% in a year. And for the installation of precast bridge segments, there is need for specialist subcontractors to carry out pre-stressing operation. And for tunnel construction, there is also a need for specialist subcontractors to carry out drilling and blasting tunneling activities. And there is a strong demand for such specialist subcontractors in the market right now. And then for E&M works, the price has also gone up substantially. We have made reference to the Building Services Tender Price Index compiled by the Architectural Services Department. It is a reference for the general trend of tender prices for E&M works. The indexes of the first quarter of 2012 and the second quarter of 2013 have gone up some 54%. And so during the period, because of the surge in these prices, the surge is reflected in the returned tender price, and tenderers may have put additional risk premium to cater for possible further market surge for the E&M works in their tenders.
Because of the upsurge in market prices, the APE will have to be adjusted by 20.4% to the tune of $3.9747 billion. The second reason is the poor ground condition for tunneling works, which is poorer than expected. A 4.8-kilometer long Longshan tunnel is involved. Upon completion, it will be the longest vehicular tunnel on land. When we reviewed the design of Longshan Tunnel, investigation results show that the ground condition was poorer than expected. We discovered that a 1.4-kilometer section has a number of faults. And when doing drilling, large-scale provisional works had to be conducted, like grouting, shotcreting, temporary supporting structures, and strengthening works of the permanent lining along the tunnel section. We discovered that in the use of machines in boring and drilling, there will be 120% increase in the excavation by TBM from some 0.3 kilometers to some 0.7 kilometer, thus leading to higher construction cost. This cause has led to a 4.3% increase in APE, that is $698.6 million. As for tenderers' perception on high risk associated with construction constraints, the risks involved are higher than expected, and tenderers are subject to construction constraints. For example, in the East Rail line, viaduct works will be subject to working time constraints, and more complicated temporary traffic arrangements will have to be carried out, and also the site of the project is rather remote. Part of the works area is in the restricted area, thus leading to a loss of attractiveness in the works project. When we carried out the cost estimation, we already gave consideration to such factors. In our neighboring jurisdictions, a number of viaduct and tunnel works are underway. Given that macro environment, tenderers may have to adopt extra measures to handle those risks, thus leading to higher construction costs than expected. Therefore, the APE will be increased by 2.4%, and an additional cost of $387.3 million. as the basic construction costs have risen, the provision for price adjustment will have to be adjusted as well. Given the actual construction timetable and the various procedures adopted by various contractors, the actual cash flow is a bit different from estimation. We have taken into consideration the latest tendering price index, which has increased when compared with the situation in 2012 when we came to LegCo for funding approval. The provision for price adjustment had to be increased by 18.4% for the APE, or 34.9% of the proposed total increase. That's why contingencies have been increased in terms of funding in order to cope with possible changes in construction works. Originally, we estimated a contingency payment of $1.13 billion. After re-estimation, $1.6363 billion has to be reserved for contingencies to cater for unforeseen situations arising during the implementation of the project. That is 10% of the APE, which is similar to other public works projects. Therefore, construction costs will be increased by 3.1%. Finally, I'd like to use this table to list out the three causes for the increases and the increases themselves. The total cost will be increased by around $5 billion. As construction costs have increased, provision for price adjustment and contingencies have to be technically adjusted. So overall speaking, we would increase the APE by $8.55 billion from $16.253.2 billion to $24.8032 billion in money of the day prices. Thank you, Chairman. Question time for members. According to 83A of the Rules of Procedure, if any member has any direct or indirect pecuniary interest in the subject matter, the member has to declare the nature of the interest before speaking. All right, question time for members. I suggest we give 4 minutes to each member, including government reply. Those who have registered for asking questions, first Dr. Kwakaki, and then Mr. Frederick Fong, Mr. Dennis, Dr. Candice Chan, Ms. Alice Mack, Ms. Emily Lau, Mr. Yu Wing, Mr. Leung Chi Chang, Mrs. Regina Ip, Mr. Wu Chi Wai, and Mr. Albert Chan. So please remember the sequence. All right, Dr. Kwakaki. Mr. Chairman, I think this is really very unreasonable. We're forced by others to approve this. 10 months ago, they told us that the sum asked for was correct, but in 18 months' time, there was an increase of 52%, $8.55 billion. Mr. Chairman, in future, they don't need to come to LegCo for estimated costs, because whatever they say is empty word. It's just like this project for Liantang, for the Fanling Highway provisional traffic realignment, etc., etc. It's just like they're from Mars. Didn't they know those conditions? The 6.9, we all know that they discovered the problems only after investigation. Well, 18 months ago, didn't you know all these conditions? All along, the government has been conducting cosmetic works projects or useless projects. Construction costs have caused tendering prices to rise, and the culprit is the government. Members of the public suffer. We're talking about $8.5 billion. They're grabbing this from us. When construction costs escalate, property prices may rise as well, and members of the public suffer. All these are meaningless. XRL and a lot other projects are put forth in one go. They cannot cope. They just want to get the projects tendered. Well, the contractors will benefit most. They put up a quotation, and then afterwards the construction prices rise throughout the whole world. Have a look at all these projects. They are bound to benefit. And all prices rise as a result. If the main contract rises in prices, all other items will rise in costs. And this morning, we discussed the Central Wan Chai bypass, and they asked for over $10 billion. But for hospitals, we asked for more beds, we asked for more RCHEs. They told us they had no money. The FS said they had no money, but they're now asking for $8 billion, $10 billion. They said that we've already started. I would like to ask the government, if there's no imminency for this project, if construction prices are to soar as a result, everything is to rise, you are competing amongst yourselves, and you are now causing all these tendering prices to rise. Why didn't they do better planning? Who should be held liable? Who will answer this? I'd like to thank Dr. Kwok for his question. In 2012, we came to the FC of LegCo for funding approval, and we did put up an estimate at that time. We made reference to the known items then, like the Two Moon reconstruction, Central Wan Chai bypass, Hong Kong, Macau, Zhuhai Bridge, etc. Now, all these were tendered in 2008-2012. After obtaining those information, our practice was to have an estimated list of analysis, risk analysis. Let me say a bit more about that. Risk assessment was conducted in advance before we came to LegCo for funding. Looking back, in that risk assessment exercise, we tried to analyze market fluctuations, particularly for this type of projects, which is a large-scale civil engineering project as well as an infrastructure project. We failed to tap the pulse then of the market, but then we've already adopted the best method to conduct analysis back then. As regards the imminency of the project, as our colleague said, this is our 7th BCP on land. Every day, 560,000 people are crossing the boundary. And all these years, the number has been rising. So, as far as imminency is concerned, we believe this number 7 BCP should be commissioned as soon as possible. Mr. Frederick Fong. Mr. Chairman, when LegCo members read administration papers in the past few days, we're not just scratching our heads. We asked whether the government is really a government. All papers are about rising costs. RTHK, and then this morning we have the Central Wan Chai bypass, and now it's your turn. And they're asking for an extra $8 to $10 billion. And you see now for this project, we see a rise of 50% in construction costs. May I refer you to pages 8 to 10. analyzing the causes behind the increases. Well, the first cause might not be under your control, but you should have foreseen that. 30%, 40%, and 50% in increases. If there were huge discrepancies between the reality and your estimation, then I'll query your method of analysis as well as your competency. Last time, before you submitted your paper, you should have conducted these analyses. You did not know of the faults in the tunnel and how many more kilometers of works you are going to handle. Last time when you submitted your paper, you did not mention this. So last time, your report was false. So when should I believe that your document is true? And every time we see so many discrepancies in your papers, so it's meaningless to listen to you. Every time, right from the start of the first paper, you should have given us all the details. Given these discrepancies, how can we accept your funding proposals? It's just like what Dr. Kwakaki said. You said we've started and we're forced to accept your proposals. We must serve as a gatekeeper. But we're talking about $8 billion. If I give you the money, you won't be learning a lesson. So as an electrical member, I do not support the funding proposals here.
Let me explain, because I didn't have enough time just now to explain in detail. Now, talking about my department first, in the past decade, 96 projects of our department received approval from the FC that involved some $74 billion. There were only 3 projects where we had to increase the APE, and that involved just about $100 million. So if you talk about how we apply for funding, is it true that our paper doesn't provide accurate information? I wouldn't deny the fact that for this particular project, the assessment wasn't accurate. But in the past 10 years, for most other projects, I think we've been doing all right. And I've explained the reasons why for this case there's such a discrepancy. First reason is because of the surge in construction costs. I tried to explain that when we did the estimate in 2012, we had regard to the actual works information available at the time, and then we did an analysis, and then we arrived at an estimate. But then perhaps at that time we were unable to foresee the surge in construction costs, because construction costs have gone up substantially in the past 2 years. The number of faults mentioned by Mr. Frederick Heung. Now, for tunneling works, let me explain. There are always uncertainties with the tunneling works. Now, what we could do is before we started the tunneling works, we'll do boring investigation. And the technical guideline is that we only do a certain percentage for the tunnel. So, for example, in the rural areas, about 0.5% of the full length of the tunnel. And for this case already, we have covered 1.5% of the full tunnel length. But boring is vertical, so we could only get information for a particular point, and over several kilometers we could only bore so many points, so we are not able to obtain the most accurate information. That's why we try to do horizontal boring or investigation. But near Lao Shui Heung, there were some problems. We were not able to gain access to the site. That we managed to cover 1.5% of the tunnel length in ground investigation, so we were fairly confident, and on that basis we came up with the estimate. But of course now, after we've got the funding approval, we managed to obtain horizontal ground investigation information. We found that there were more faults than originally anticipated. I think you've used up your time. Next, Dr. Kenneth Chen. Dr. Kenneth Chen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was a question of responsibility. I think we have to sort that out clearly. I think members have been asking this question for this project. There's a need for a special meeting today to deal with this increase in APE, and then it will go all the way to the Finance Committee. Who should be held responsible? You might say that just over a year ago in 2012 we approved some for you, but before that there were some $268 million approved for site investigation. But then today in the paper we told that there are certain things you couldn't do. Just now the director was even more specific. In fact, I was going to ask specifically what was it that you couldn't do. That's why for your site investigation works, well, we paid over $260 million for you to do site investigation. It was only after that, in 2012, you came back to seek funding approval. But now you told us there's certain things you couldn't do. You said weather was a factor. Now, that's odd, but we don't get downpour every day. We don't get typhoons every day. And you say there's obstruction or delay. What do you mean by delay? Can you be more specific? You mentioned Heung. You said there was some sort of obstruction. Was it because someone obstructed you? In that case, shouldn't someone be held responsible? Director or Deputy Secretary, please. Let me continue. I tried to explain just now. For civil engineering works, in particular tunneling works, it's not possible to obtain 100% of the ground information. Usually we just do borrowing to obtain information, and we worked out the estimate. We completed the borrowing investigation, and that's why I said that usually it's just 5.5%. So if we go by the guideline, that's good enough for the purpose of preparing an estimate. So we try, but then we try to obtain more information horizontally along the alignment of the tunnel. We try to obtain more information horizontally so that we could match it to the information we obtained vertically. We try to see if the information matched. So in terms of seeking funding approval, we've already obtained enough information. But the question is, you tried to obtain more information, but we weren't able to. But if you had been able to obtain information, then your estimate would have been more accurate. Am I right? Yes, you're right. Now, for horizontal investigation, you mentioned weather. Well, access to that site is a bit difficult. We had to use helicopters to drop the machinery there. And during that time, there was a lot of fog, and also because of the topography, there was a problem with transportation. And that's ground land, that's government land actually. But when we go to the rural areas, usually we would first talk to the local villagers, and that took up a bit more time. It was only later on that we managed to gain access to the site. But it doesn't mean that the information we originally obtained was not sufficient for preparing the estimate. Obviously, it's not sufficient. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to come back and tell us that you need to use more machinery, need to and so on for the tunneling works. And you couldn't even come up with an estimate on the additional labor costs. So there are still some gaps in this paper as you try to seek an increase in APE. Of course, we would like to believe that for departments they have internal guidelines to follow, but then for this particular project in 2012 when you came for funding, before that actually you already obtained over $200 million for ground investigation. You should have done something then, but you didn't do a proper job, and then now you told us the information was not accurate. It seems that there's a gap somewhere that and now you are trying to force this upon us. I think it's unacceptable. Please be concise. I'll be concise. I just want to repeat a point. When we prepared the design, we obtained enough information. We just wanted more information horizontally for review. And now we found more faults. Actually, even if we were able to obtain the horizontal information earlier, we would still have to spend the money. Because for tunneling works, there are always uncertainties. Now, if we have to go past faults, we have to do the works. Yes, but then now you would have asked for less of an increase in APE, right? Although you would still have to spend the same amount of money at the end. Ms. Ellis-Mack, it's the same question we asked this morning. Just now, a member also asked a question. For the ground condition, how come it's only now you tell us all this? You know, weather, whatever factors you mentioned. Are these factors really important enough to justify such a substantial increase in APE? Is it because you didn't do a proper site investigation job? Now, tunneling works, this is not the first project in Hong Kong. And for other countries, is it true that it's so difficult to do ground investigation as well? So at the end, construction costs might soar substantially. Is it the case that in Hong Kong the ground condition is particularly poor or complex or what? Second point. Now, I don't understand it. How come for all the project cost increase, you blame it on the increase in wages of workers? Is it true that wages have gone up so much? You mentioned the increase is from 18% to 46%. If the increase is so good, then the labor unions won't have to work so hard, because labor unions are here to help workers get more benefit. If the wage increase has been this substantial, we wouldn't have needed to work so hard. So that's why we cannot agree to these figures. We don't believe in these figures. If you tell us for workers, wages have gone up so much, that's why project costs have gone up so much, sorry, no, we cannot support that argument. Yes, we appreciate that the works are more difficult, but don't try to blame it on staff cost or workers' cost. On ground condition, perhaps this table will show it clearly. Now, for the overall estimate, we are proposing an increase of $8.55 billion. For the difference in ground condition is about 4.3%. That $700 million extra, that is. And I tried to explain just now. For the information we obtained and for the information now we obtained in the review, we found more faults. Now, even if we were able to see that on day one, we will still have to spend the same amount of money, as Dr. Kenneth Chen said. It's just that if we had foreseen this, we would have included it in the original APE, so the current proposed increase wouldn't be as substantial, that's all. About overseas guidelines, tunneling works in countryside or rural areas. The ground investigation work is usually about 0.5% of the tunneling works. That's more or less the standard. But then in built-up areas like urban areas, maybe the percentage would be higher. Or if the ground condition is poor, maybe the percentage would also be higher. Maybe in those cases, then it could be 2 or 3%. For us, in this case, we have achieved 1.5%, so that's in line with the criterion. We follow the international standard here. And all I want to say is that for tunneling works, they are usually more complicated because we could never be 100% sure about the ground condition until we have completed the tunneling works. For workers and the wages, I'd like to explain, it's not because of increase in wages. That's why there's this increase. Perhaps I didn't make myself clear. I just tried to say wages were one of the factors. And now the information we obtain is from the Census and Statistics Department. Yes, I would like you to clarify that, Director, because otherwise people blame that it's because of high wages. Because if wages are really this high, we wouldn't need to work this hard. Ms. Emily Lau, this is the second case. This morning, 8:30, there's an increase of some $7-8 billion. Now is again $8 billion. Do you think we are as filthily rich as Stanley Ho? Of course not. Don't think that we are the ATM. So you have to do proper monitoring. Is it because that the tycoons see a chance here to profiteer? seeing that Hong Kong is flushed with cash. But for education, welfare, you're not as generous. But for these cases, you say because you've started the project, so there's no turning back. But you could always just leave the projects unfinished. Even if you don't leave the projects unfinished. Your PowerPoint presentation number 9, you said construction prices have surged. Is it because there are too many projects going on at the same time, Director? If that is the case, should you not try to make adjustments to your work programs? Because so many people are competing for the same resources, of course, prices will go up. But you may say, though, because we do have plenty of money. So, Director, can you explain this? If you spread out the projects or delay some of the projects, would it be the case then taxpayers won't have to pay so much? Because there are so many projects competing for these resources, for these works resources, of course, prices go up. No, we don't seem to have a lot of choice. But here we're talking about a huge sum of money. I think a Democratic Party must really consider this carefully. You know, you act as if we're just the ATM. You just come and throw money when you wish. No, it won't work that way. What about spreading out the various projects? Maybe there won't be so much competition for the same pool of resources. Then maybe prices won't surge so much. Could that be the case?
Director, I can't comment on all public works programs. I'm only responsible for the CEDD. I'll defer to Mr. Chan later for a supplement. We don't always have an upsurge in prices for all projects. This particular project is special. It's a large-scale civil engineering project. It's in a remote area in North District. It's less accessible. As our colleague said, for Contract 1, right from the very beginning, we saw that the prices would be higher than estimated. We immediately asked the tenderers why the tendering prices were so high, and they told us the details. So we tried to reduce their risks, and then they reduced their prices. That's why you saw that Contract 1 was cancelled and divided into 2 contracts, Contracts 5 and 6. After this action, when compared with Contract 1, we had already reduced the prices. And of course, there was a reduction of a few $100 million. For this particular project, it's rather special. It's of a larger scale. It's in North District in the New Territories. If it is to be slowed down, I can only see that there will be a further upsurge in prices. For public works projects and in the private sector, the total prices would be around $170 billion. So by delaying it or slowing it down, we won't see a price reduction. Mr. Chairman, what if we do not approve their funding proposals? They must have a way out. Will you just break up the project into several contracts? Mr. Chairman, let me say something from the macro point of view for public works projects. Members are concerned about this upsurge in tendering prices. In fact, this morning I already made the same explanation, but some members were not there, so I'll say a few words about that. In the past financial year, the FC vetted 600 public works projects. For those with overspending and need extra funding, there were 34 projects. As for the percentage of overspending, it's 3.4% of the total. In many cases, there was no overspending. We even had reductions, but we did not take that into account in our paper. We seriously consider prices. We looked at all the details. For this Liantang project, together with the CEDD, we reviewed the project and the causes of overspending. We did a lot of analysis. I can say that last year, the Development Bureau commissioned a university professor to look at the whole public works program. He reviewed our methodology, our estimation method, and a comparison was drawn between us and 34 other jurisdictions. Our civil engineering projects are special. Occasionally we had overspending, but that did not happen frequently. In overseas jurisdictions, very often they had an overspending of 20%. But in Hong Kong, well, don't drag on. Well, for us, overall speaking, the overspending was negative 1%. That is, we had a price reduction and we had stringent monitoring. But for individual projects like this one and the Central Wan Chai bypass, the conditions were special. Well, Mr. Chairman, they said they performed very well, but just in one single project, they cleared our pocket. Mr. Yuen, in 18 months, they overspent by 50%. Well, if it is their own business, it would not have happened. But this is a public works project, so they will say, oh, it doesn't matter, let's give it a try. Now, this is unacceptable. For contracts 2 and 3, they are already underway. As a businessman, I can say that a tenderer has already successfully bid for the project. So that contractor should be responsible. We should not bear the extra costs in construction. Now for contracts 2 and 3, what's the extra funding sought? Can you talk to the contractor concerned and try to suppress costs? For contract 1, it was broken down into 2 contracts to reduce the overall spending. Now, after that breakdown, how much spending had been saved? Now, contract 1 was divided into 2, affecting savings. So for contract 4, how much savings could be attained? Perhaps I should give you the overall picture. Just now I said that contract 1 no longer exists. It's divided into contracts 5 and 6. Overall speaking, 5, 6, 3, 2 had got a tender prices. For contracts 2 and 3, they're already underway. Mr. Yu was correct. Contracts 2 and 3 already have a tendered price, which is stable. So the tendered price will remain stable. For contracts 5, 6, 2, and 3, roughly speaking, we know the tendered prices for the detailed items. So estimation could be more accurate. But for contracts 2 and 3, the bids had been awarded, so we cannot ask for a reduction in prices. But what about contracts 2 and 3? Any extra funding sought? Will we take the full picture? No, that's not appropriate. Contracts 2 and 3, what's the extra funding asked for? For 19 GB, now you look at slide 5, the green part is site formation for 23 hectares and then 11 kilometers of the highway, and then Fanning Highway interchange, the purple part. We take all these as one project. The construction costs have risen, so we're asking for extra funding. As for the breakdowns, we look at the special aspects of each and every item. But for the whole project, we ask for one single extra funding. For contracts 5 and 6, how much could be saved? As I said, contracts 5 and 6 were originally contract 1, which was broken down into contracts 5 and 6, and $900 million could be saved when compared with the original estimate for contract 1. That's lower than contract 1. As for other contracts, we've considered the possibility of further breaking down. But this is linear works. we cannot allow different contractors to enter the work sites. It's just like the viaduct. We had already done relevant works. Next, Mr. Leung Chi-Chung. Mr. Chairman, this is different from the RTHK proposal. This project is already underway. They're asking for extra funding. If we do not approve their proposals, this project will fall apart and will become a laughingstock in the world. But this $8.5 billion is also a laughingstock. So we're caught in a dilemma. Whether or not we approve your extra funding proposal will be a laughingstock. Now for the ground condition that you mentioned, you said that you suddenly discovered that the ground conditions were poorer than expected. But we don't know the various terms that you use here. There's one expression that is rather strange. The bedrock, that's in paragraph 14. The site investigation revealed that the ground conditions were poorer, and in the extent of mixed ground, which is more difficult for tunnel construction, in the section of the tunnel to be excavated by TBM was found to be longer by about 120%. What about the rock investigation? Was it done by the consultant or by the CEDD? Director? I'll defer to the director of CEDD to give you the technical details. But let me answer Mr. Leung's question first. We commission a consultant engineer to do design and supervision of works, including tunnel investigation. Yes. Can you accept this excessive 120% technically? I'll defer to the director. Director? Head of the Civil Engineering Office. Well, here it said that the extent of mixed ground was increased from 0.3 kilometers to 0.7 kilometer, an increase of about 120%. For vertical bores, given the conditions, we did detailed design. As for the horizontal bores, which were used for review, we discovered that the extent of mixed ground has increased from 0.3 kilometer to 0.7 kilometer. This was not ideal. In this regard, well, I'd like to ask you, in terms of engineering technicalities, would this happen very often? Is this a small discrepancy? Is it that very frequently you have a discrepancy of 100% or even more? But Mr. Chairman, this is strange. It's not 12%, it's 120%. Mr. Chairman, just now I tried to explain that civil engineering projects are more complicated. We never know the ground condition until, I'm talking about the mixed ground. The mixed ground is longer than expected by about 120%. 220 meters, that's the present length. I mean, in Hong Kong, for such projects, did you have precedents? Oh, yes. In deep-sea tunnels, when we discovered that faults were many faults more than expected, in one of the projects below Kwai Chung, we discovered that for the deep water tunnel, we spent a year before we can pass the fault. Next. Mr. Chen, any supplement? No? All right, next one, Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the Deputy Secretary or the Director a question. Recently, from a TV program, I saw that in handling manpower shortage and high worker wages, prefabricated units were used. So in this project, how many such units have you used? And to what extent were you able to reduce costs as a result? Now, construction costs rise so tremendously. In the next few years, you will effect a rise of over $18 billion. Is it that even if you have money, you're unable to hire workers, or you need to tighten your training programs? Well, Mr. Chairman, perhaps I should say something about the prefabricated units first. For the blue tunnel, we'll mainly use machines, so not many prefabricated units will be used. For the viaduct, according to our program, prefabricated units will be used. About 40 to 50% of the viaduct would be made of prefabricated units. What about workers and labor cost? Let me say something about workers. We are short of construction workers at the moment, and we're adopting a number of methods. In terms of design, we try to use prefabricated units and machines to replace workers. Besides, we step up our training programs, and in recent times we've been doing so, and we've enhanced our programs to attract more young people to join the construction industry. As far as design is concerned, in recent years in the construction industry, we tried to use designs that could save workers and labor. Our future projects will also head towards that direction. That is, we'll use 3S: simplification, standardization, and prefabricated units in order to save labor. As for the supplementary labor importation scheme, we would like to give priority to local workers. That is, we would not like to affect local workers as far as possible. But where and when necessary, we need to consider the supplementary labor importation scheme. There are two merits here. Immediately, we can increase the number of technical workers. Secondly, we can vacate, so to speak, certain skilled workers and train them for other job types. Well, some of them may be semi-skilled workers at the beginning. So we're adopting a dual approach. What sort of skilled workers are particularly in shortage, or in the short term you can't have a supply? Well, like we have individual operators, benders and fixers, rigger and mental form work erectors. Now these workers are in shortage. We do have training difficulties. Overall speaking, we would like to attract more young people to join the construction industry. But still, upon entry to the industry, young people have to choose which job types they prefer. So, this is an active process.
Now, only 8 colleagues have had a chance to ask questions. We have many more on the list. So I think I will have to be very strict with the time limit. If members agree, we could extend the meeting for another 50 minutes when we reach 6. Still, there may not be enough time for all members. Let me read out the list. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, Mr. Albert Chen, Dr. Fernando Zheng, Ms. Ann Chan, Ms. Chen Yun-han, Mr. Michael Tian, Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, Mr. Ray Chen, Mr. James To, Mr. Ip Kok Him, Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. So altogether, 90 members want to ask questions, 10 have asked questions, and so 9 have asked questions, so we have to be very strict with the time limit now. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Now, from paragraph 16 onwards, for 3 paragraphs, there's explanation. Reason why construction costs have gone up is because of the tight works program. Yes, we know that in these few years there have been a number of major infrastructure projects, but reading from these paragraphs, it means that construction or tender prices have surged because tenderers could foresee the tight works programs for various works projects, and that's why they've increased the risk assessment, and they have reflected that in the tender price. So is it possible to stretch out the projects? Must 2018 be the deadline? That's the first question. Second question. Now, tenderers have already made the risk assessments. They have already included the risk premiums in the next few years in the tender prices. So the increase in provision for price adjustment, does it mean that within this estimate there is the case of double accounts for the government? That means we duplicate the counting of risks, because already the risk premium is included in the tendered price by contractors. So I'd like to find out about these 2 points. And the third point. Now, return tender prices are high. It's because contractors have accounted for high level of risks in the costs. Is there any way the government could reduce the risks by, say, retendering? And then hopefully we could bring the project cost down. So 3 questions. If I may refer you to the table again. Now, if you see that risk assessments higher than expected is about $300 million compared to the other factors, we just talk about risk. This is the amount. And for risk, there are several factors here. For individual tenderers may think that perhaps the works program is too tight, but we've done some analysis. For tunneling works, it's about 4 years, just over 4 years. We've looked at other tunnel projects, say the Tsim Sha Tsui tunnel. The time frame is more or less the same. But then tenderers may think that because now more faults have been found, it's possible that there could still be more faults. Or as I explained earlier, with tunneling works, there are always uncertainties. So it's possible, therefore, tenderers would account for a higher risk premium. But then the $300 million is not just about a time frame. For example, in Fanling Highway, if we have to implement temporary traffic measures, or along the East Rail Line, we have to do works, the viaduct works in the area, and so on. These are all constraints. Yes, that I follow. But in the paper, it said that the tenders have higher than expected risk assessment to cater for the tight works program. So this is reflected in the tender price. That's why overall tender prices have gone up. Yes, where the risks are higher is for item 3. That's our analysis. So you're saying that, say, for the price, the cost, labor, wages, or hiring of machinery and so on, they all have nothing to do with the risk of the project? Or we could look at it this way. The first item, surge in construction costs, we can see that in the past year or so, for various factors, especially for viaduct projects and tunneling projects and E&M works, prices have gone up. That has nothing to do with the works program. That's not what we see. For works program, that's accounted for under item 3. And I don't think I have enough time. Next, Mr. Albert Chan. Mr. Chairman, in terms of the technical aspect and the pricing aspect, I can appreciate the difficulties. Whether it be a government project or a private project, construction costs could surge substantially because the tender prices have gone up substantially. That happened in the 1990s when there was a peak in construction activities, and it seems that we're repeating that peak now. This is not something that the government alone could control. There are various factors, for example, the overall construction market in Hong Kong, or even the global trend and situation. Now, you try to keep the price surge down. Something we can do in Hong Kong, but something is beyond our control. Now, we have looked at other projects recently. There were 5 projects recently. The cost has exceeded the estimate by tens of billions of dollars, and that means more spending of public money. I think we have to review which projects are essential or which projects could be delayed or shelved altogether. For example, the RTHK building, the price has gone up from $1.6 billion to $6 billion. The loyalist camp has opposed that increase, and so this project is shut down. But of course, it's mostly political. But in this case, the overrun is even higher by 52% over a short period of time. Is substantial. So this projects got even higher overrun. So I think the government should reduce the number of projects. Perhaps for some projects that they could be delayed or shelved, and because we're going to have more problems soon in the next few years. For public housing estates that have been completed for 20 years or more, they will have to undergo major renovation. And already we're talking about an extra $4 to $5 billion worth of projects every year. And then in the next few years, there will be a substantial increase in housing supply. That means more building works. So if there are so many major projects going on, there's no way these projects could just keep increasing. And construction costs may already reach some $170 billion a year. That would be a historical high. And so this will go out of control. There's no way we could keep increasing the number of projects infinitely. We have to give a message to the public and the contractors. We are going to stop reduce the number of projects. So otherwise, the cost will keep soaring. It's like a domino effect. So it's about time to set out a message. Perhaps Liantang would become the victim of this exercise, but it's time that we call a halt to this. So we have no choice, but we have to stop this search somewhere. So I will have to veto this project today. Director, 2 points. Or head of office. Well, I hope members will have regard to the economic benefits of the Liantang project and its overall benefits on the community, apart from providing the boundary crossing point. Well, there's no urgency for BCP. Hong Kong people are more and more against cross-boundary activities. So if you mention cross-boundary activities, that's one more reason for us to oppose this project. But in the long run, in the next 20, 30 years, it will bring about far more economic benefits than the cost of the project. We don't want more people coming here to snatch our milk powder. It's not yet your turn, so shut up. Second point about the project. Mr. Chairman, someone is again losing it. You should call a doctor. Someone is having not a fit. No, coming back to the overall works program, this year for the government is about $70 billion in terms of spending. So some projects will be completed and some projects will start, so that will remain more or less the level in the next few years. Together with the Construction Industry Council, we have done some estimate of construction activities in the next few years. It will be about $170 billion per year. In the next few years, we should be able to maintain that level. We want to keep it at that level so workers will have work. At the same time, we don't want construction costs to fluctuate substantially. Next, Dr. Fernando Cheung. No, just now there's mention of economic benefits. That's exactly the point I want to raise. The government's own estimation is that for this BCP, after its completion for the next 10 years, that means from 2018 to 2030, economic benefits could amount to $14.3 billion. But then in 2009, already we have approved $18 billion. even without the supplementary provision. That means after the completion of the BCP, 12 years after that, we will still not be able to recover our cost. Now the government is coming for another $8.5 billion. That means in future our loss would be some $12.2 billion. And even by 2030, I'm talking about 2030, by then we will still be losing some $12 billion. And before then we would have lost even more because we couldn't recover the costs. So that's worrying. Now we want to stop a loss for contracts 2, 3, and 5, which are already underway. How much do they add up to together? Now I want to find out if we oppose this new funding application, that means we want to stop loss, then what is the total loss incurred? But if we approve this supplementary provision, definitely we're going to lose $12 billion in future. But for contracts 2, 3, and 5, how much do they add up to? Director? Dr. Cheung referred to 2030 $14.3 billion. That's the previous estimate. That's on the basis of 2007 price levels. But I think after that, there's been some revised estimate. I believe that's been submitted to Electrical. By 2050, that would be $50 billion. But for this figure, it's just to quantify the estimate. By that I mean this BCP is an 11-kilometer road in northeast NT. It will be an excellent infrastructure project because we don't have proper viaduct road in that area of the NT. I just want to explain things first. I have to explain things first. So I want to know exactly how much it costs for contracts 2, 3, and 5. Now, by quantifying the figure, we're saying that it will save on traveling time, and also it will save on depreciation of vehicles. But then for other benefits, they may not be quantified, so we couldn't give a figure for that. Now, for this BCP, as I explained earlier, every year there's an increase in cross-boundary traffic. Yes, I know there are various calculations, but you still haven't answered me how much do contracts 2, 3, and 5 add up to. Now, let me finish. For such, for quantifying this calculation, it's just $50 billion. Just only covers items that could be quantified, but it doesn't cover items that could not be quantified. I remember there's another figure, $12 billion or so that's been approved. That's the figure I have in mind.
That means if we stop now, at most we'll have a deficit of $12 billion. That is for the contracts awarded. Now for this $8.5 billion, well, I'd like Electrical members to think about this very carefully. Many works have already started. If suddenly there's no funding, these contracts will have to be terminated, and then we have to discuss with the contractors what should happen. Mr. Chairman, now we've already allocated $18 billion to them, and now we're talking about $12 billion only, so they have sufficient funds. I think I've expressed my opinion very clearly. I oppose this funding proposal. It doesn't matter. When the time comes, you can oppose the funding proposal. Now, members, 8 more members are queuing up. Do you agree that we extend the meeting to 6 p.m.? All right? With your consent, we can extend the meeting to 6:30 p.m. with your consent. Otherwise, we'll stick to 6 p.m. All right? There's no objection. Well, Mr. Chairman, I can't stay till 6:30. Who else is not available till 6:30? You oppose 6:30. Oh, 6:15. All right, if members so agree. Dr. Chang Lai-wan. Mr. Chairman, please be quick. After looking at this project, well, I haven't even started, and you asked me to be quick. For this project, I really feel that the government is not monitoring these projects sufficiently. The mode of spending, the method of estimation, and so forth are disappointing. That's why for those remarks made by members apart from those meaningless remarks made by Mr. Albert Chan have been reasonable. Well, basically, they have a manpower shortage for the tunneling works. You know that the XRL, the Sha-Tin Central Link, and many tunnel works are underway. Well, the scheduled completion dates are around 2017, 2018, like this one. As for this project, you've not yet started, so can you start later? Well, if you have started, it's unreasonable for us to stop you midway, but basically you have not started. Just now, you were very honest, Director. You said that your first analysis was wrong, but for environment analysis, in the second analysis, you're also wrong. We asked whether you could wait till all other projects had been completed before you start this one. It doesn't matter if you start later. Well, there are other boundary crossings that are still okay. Well, during the festivals like the Chinese New Year, they may be more crowded. But for Shenzhen, they agree to open up BCPs to a 24-hour operation. So for this particular project, can you start a bit later? Can you consider that? And when I read the map, I would like to ask you whether a tunnel is necessary. Can you widen Sha Tau Kok Road instead? Well, just think about this. 5.7 kilometers of tunnel. You ask for over $600 million. And for the tunnels, the ventilation building, over $1.17 billion. Well, just these two items add up to $8 billion. Should you consider design adjustments? Is it really necessary to have a tunnel? I can see that Sha Tau Kok Road can be widened. Yes, it's at grade work, which is much cheaper. While widening Sha Tau Kok Road, you should consider whether you need a viaduct. We'll leave some time for them to answer your questions. All right, please answer my questions. Well, thank you, Dr. Chang, for your questions, which we understand. Well, in just over a year, the prices had soared by 50%. Back then, we did not master the market well enough. Dr. Chang put forth a number of suggestions. First of all, to do away with the tunnel. Now, what about this viaduct? If it becomes an at-grade road, well, give me some time to answer your questions. Only with a viaduct can we have a highway, an expressway. For Sha Tau Kok, Sha Tau Kok Road, it has a lot of traffic lights. It cannot be an expressway. So we have to coordinate among environment, residents, EIAs, etc. And this alignment will be the best. Well, please grasp your time well. Otherwise, the other members won't have time. Ms. Chen Yuen Han, Mr. Chairman, I think you're also in difficulty. I'll grasp my time well. In recent days, we've been facing these overspending projects to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. This morning, we had an overspending of $7 billion. The director did fetch us for a discussion. In those discussions, we came to understand their difficulties. But we would like to put forth some queries here. Issues like the ground conditions, you said that you only grasped 70% of the ground condition then. You've only gone through 18 months. You should give us a stronger guarantee in future. I won't say that you're in dereliction of duty. You got 70% samples, and for the remaining 30%, you encountered problems. Same for Eastern District. For the consultancy and your monitoring work, the CDD told us that when compared with China, we're better. You cannot say that. Objectively, the fact is that in just 18 months' time, you're coming back for extra funding. This morning, I already said something, and just now Mr. Chan was repeating what he said this morning. For the Highways Department, as Mr. Han said, 6 to 7% of their projects in the past 10 years overspent. Those who are responsible told us that there was a 3% overspending in the past 10 years. I hope that Mr. Chen Chi-ming can make himself clearer. When you ask for another $7 billion or $8 billion, are you talking about recent projects? Well, I left the Legco for 5 years. Previously, when I was with Legco, I already said that you had to make preparation. When all projects start at the same time, you definitely have a manpower problem. You also have technical problems. Back then, you guaranteed us that everything would be possible. Miss Alice Mack told me, Miss Chen Yuen Han, the director told us that there would not be any problem. No. Well, let me refer to your PowerPoint slides. Overspending factors. Upsurge of construction costs for the 5 job types. Concreters, barbenders, and fixers, riggers, and metal formwork erectors, etc. Well, this morning, I was very annoyed. In Hong Kong, many workers would like to have such jobs, but precisely you do not prepare yourselves well. And now, all these projects converge at the same time. You have a bunching effect. Now, objectively, you definitely have an upsurge in tendering prices and construction costs. Well, can you delay this project slightly? And you mentioned contractors' estimation. Page 14, tenderers' risk assessment. The actual risks have been higher than estimated. So you are hard-pressed by the contractors, and you are now forcing upon us this extra funding proposal. I don't think we can agree to your proposal today. As for the RTHK project, I don't know whether they can reduce the scale of their project. Maybe we'll agree to that. So can you reduce the scale of this project as well? Let me clarify certain factors because Ms. Chan mentioned some figures. This morning, in the past 10 years, for the Highways Department, the overspending was 6% for their contracts. And just now I said that for the past 10 years, for our 600 projects, in the past 10 years, 32 projects had come for extra funding. In money terms, 3.4%. But this morning, we're talking about the Highways Department. Well, some departments affected a higher overspending, some less. But for us, it's 3.4%. Don't use 10 years. Otherwise, I won't be able to grasp what you're saying. Well, if you still don't understand, ask him after this meeting. We don't have enough time. Here. Mr. Michael Tan, I'd like to ask something about enclosure 3. You have tables 1 and 2. Table 1 for 2012, Table 2 for 2013. Now, for 2012, your estimation was $12 billion, right? At 2011 prices. For contracts 1 to 6, how many did you award? Contracts 1 to 6 in Table 1, which were awarded. Or, for all 6 contracts, you're only guessing. Thank you, Mr. Chen. For Table 1, $12 billion. The year before last, we came here for funding. All those contracts were not yet awarded back then. Not yet awarded. So, for Table 1, none of the contracts had been awarded back then. All these were internal estimation. All right, Table 2, in 2011 prices, the figure had already increased from $12 billion to $18 billion. Table 2, how many contracts were awarded? Table 2, 3 contracts were awarded. Which 3? Contracts 2, 3, and 5. 2, 3, 5. 1 became 6, so 4 and 6 were not awarded. 4 and 6 not yet awarded. All right, for contracts 4 and 6 in Table 2, you're only guessing. For contract 6, you can refer to this slide. It's all guesswork, right? For contracts 4 and 6, they're only estimations. Well, we are vetting the bids for the latest tendering prices. Oh, included already. Right, included. So in Table 2, which contracts were not yet awarded? 3 were awarded. For 1 contract, we already know the bidding prices. In this slide, there are 2 smaller contracts. Contracts 4 and 7. 4 and 7 not yet awarded. Right. Now, Table 1, no contract awarded. Table 2, some contracts awarded, some not yet. For internal estimation, when compared with the actual tendering prices, there are huge discrepancies, right? So I can assume that for the estimates in Table 2, by the time you award the remaining contracts, these figures will no longer be true. Now today you come here to talk about $18 billion plus price adjustments. You have $24 billion, but that's not the final figure, right? Is my interpretation correct? That means next time, $24 billion may become $30 billion or even $35 billion. For the 4 contracts, they are of a larger scale, but contracts 4 and 7 are smaller in scale. How small? What's the price? According to our estimation now, for those 2 contracts, together they won't exceed $1 billion, or are not exceeding $1 billion. So for Table 2, the larger scale projects had already been awarded. No more increases. So for the awarded contracts, the prices are fixed, even though you have price adjustments. And then for the remaining $1 billion, no matter how you go about it, $24 billion would be reliable. Right, you can say so.
On closure to, I still have 1 minute? No. 4 minutes. You've used up your time already. So all the contracts have been awarded. This is the ultimate figure, right? Now, when we ask members to extend meeting to 6:30, but you only agree to extend meeting to 6:15, we have to vote on it. So we keep to 4 minutes, and we just have another 17 minutes left, and there are 5 members still on the list. So if you're happy, let's shorten the time limit to 3 minutes. Then next, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. I think Mr. Michael Tan's questions are reasonable. Now, I think you actually tell the did you tell the consultant how many samples to work on, or was it was there any negligence on the part of the consultants? If you asked them to do the sample this way, then you were negligent, not the consultant. Then your head should roll. That's the first point. Second point. Now, I'm not happy to hear this. Every time prices go up, you want supplementary provision. Is it because, as Michael Ten put it, you just did an estimate, by the time you actually embark upon the project, prices go up? Is that the case? Or when you sign a contract, that's not the figure, but then people now claim extra from you, so because it's confusing. Is it the case that when you sign a contract, you say that if prices go up in line with market level, then people could claim extra from you? Could you show us all the documents? Is there any commercial secret? Because the project is already underway, so is there still commercial secret? I'm not at ease with the way you deal with contracts. I've been in the construction industry. Now, contractors usually will submit a very low bid, but then afterwards they will try to claim extra. So can you show us all the contracts? Because I'm really not, I'm really worried because this increase is exorbitant. On ground condition, as I explained, when we worked on the estimate, we did the investigation. It was about 1.5% of the tunneling project cost. That's in line with our own guideline and the international guideline. It's only later on when we do the review, and when we did the review, and then we did more ground investigation. And what we did then was not to do the investigation vertically, but rather horizontally. And that's when we found there were more faults, and so more work would be needed. As I explained earlier, when it comes to tunneling works, there are always uncertainties. We cannot be 100% sure until the works are completed. But did you just tell the consultant to do the vertical boring and not the horizontal boring, or afterwards you believe that it's necessary to do the horizontal boring? Because it's important to whom we put the blame. Because if you ask the consultant to do it and they didn't do a proper job, they should have got insurance cover, and they should pay for it. Why should we pay for it? Otherwise, if consultants could do whatever they want, it's total waste of money on our part. Now, ground investigation is professional judgment. No, but there's no professional judgment. I'm sure the risks are the same all over the world. Mr. Ray Chen, I want to talk about the poor ground condition. It's not just about overspending. It's about safety or danger. If you say the ground condition is poor, then it must be really poor. Now, the ground condition is poor. Would it only add to the cost in terms of risk, or is there a real danger? That is, if the ground condition is this poor, would you have chosen a different site? Or would it be the case that you just spend more on grouting, concreting, or supporting structure and so on, then you definitely could build a tunnel? So it's all a matter of cost, that's all. That's my first question. Just now, the CDD colleague said that there's no way you could guess how poor the ground condition is. The more you dig, maybe you find the condition is poorer. But has there been any case in the past that at the end you had to abandon the alignment because you chose the wrong alignment? Or is it just about risk assessment? That means it's all about calculation. That is, you underestimate the risk, so it costs less. But then when you find that the actual situation is really bad, then you just come back for more money. And then we would have no choice but to cough up, because otherwise it could become a dangerous project. Is that the case? A quick reply, Mr. Chairman. We've already built many tunnels in Hong Kong. For the most difficult tunnel, I was in charge of it. That was under the sea, over 100 meters under the sea, and we still managed to build the tunnel. This tunnel, in comparison, is a lot easier. And in reply to your question, is the case that we couldn't complete the tunnel? No, it would never be the case, and there's no problem with safety aspect either. Maybe if we had the information earlier, we could be more accurate in our estimate. But now, after later on, we find more fault zones, then we just need to do more engineering works, and it will still be very safe. I'm sure I think you should be confident in the work area in Hong Kong. You can see that all our works are safe, so it can be done. So then it's not the case that it's that tough, but rather when you first did the estimate, you just did some sampling, you said, oh, it's not, you try to present it as not difficult, but then now you come back for more money, you're trying to tell us that there are more and more faults you find is getting tougher and tougher. No, please don't get the misunderstanding. I said 1.5%, that means for the boring investigation, the amount is 1.5% of the total tunneling works cost. That's not a small amount at all. Internationally, it's just 0.5% for rural areas. Only in special cases would the amount be higher. So we have spent enough. So in response to the question, we have done enough. There's a proper professional judgment, just that we're doing more in the review stage. Mr. James Toh? I'd just like to seek some information, Mr. Chairman. Contracts 1 to 4, and then contracts 5 and 6. Contracts 5 and 6 are actually originally contract 1. For the contracts already awarded, who are the parties involved? What are their parent companies? And the consultant, who's the consultant? The name of the consultant. And our legal analysis. As Mr. Leung Kwok-Hung mentioned, is there any possibility for pursuing legal liability with any parties? Have you sought legal advice there? Mr. Chairman, for each unit, doesn't matter if it's the contractor or the consultancy firm. I don't have the information, the detailed information here, but I could provide it later. But as I said earlier, when we did the investigation, we covered 1.5%. And professionally, it's definitely not a departure from the standard practice. I've said this many times, I don't want to repeat the point, but when it comes to tunneling works, there are bound to be uncertainties. And in this case, we did the horizontal investigation just to minimize the uncertainty. So all we could do is at both ends of the tunnel, we did some horizontal investigation or boring to check the ground condition, because it's underneath the mountain. If you do it vertically, you could not obtain 100% of the ground condition, but that's the unique feature of civil engineering works. Even if you do it horizontally, you can't cover the full length of the tunnel because it's a question of loading. So here, I do not see any question of liability here. On the detailed information about the contractors and so on, I could provide it later. Perhaps you could also provide this piece of information. That is, initially, whether you believe there are any problems with the consultant. Try to spell that out in a paper. And then we could ask the professionals to assess that. Okay? Now, please allow me to extend the meeting to 6:20 because 2 more members on the list. Next, Mr. Lee Kwok-Him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the Liantang BCP, we see the need for it. Now, the eastern part of Shenzhen and the northeast new territories, this will be an additional link, and there's a need for this link. And there's been an increasing traffic across the boundaries. So that's why there's a need for this project, and we support the project. But by this stage, is it really true there's no room for delaying the project? I hope you'll consider it carefully. Now, because this is disappointing. 18 months ago, you came to us and we discussed the project, and now 18 months later, you tell us you need an additional $8.5 billion. It's a huge increase. I think it's really hard to accept by the public or by us. The tunneling works part is not the bulk of the project. The bulk of the increase is due to construction costs soaring 30-odd%. And that already accounts for some $2.9 billion. That's why this is the bulk of the increase. Now, you said the contracts have been signed, but can I try to seek clarification here? Okay, you have signed the contracts. So every month you look at the materials used, the labor, wages incurred, and so on, and that all adds up to an increase, or is it about the heavy machinery? Is it just about the heavy machinery? Really, we need you to explain to us in great details about all these aspects. It's not a simple question of whether we support this proposal, because we don't have enough information. We have great reservation about this funding proposal. So you need to provide us with the information, the points I mentioned. Mr. Chairman, perhaps I could not give quick reply. I won't have enough time. Perhaps we'll try to answer Mr. Yip and other members' questions in detail. Yes, fine. But I think we could give a bit more details here. Would it be better that if this project is delayed? But as we said already, it won't be good to have delays. Now, during the peak of the 10 major infrastructure projects in August 1994, we worked on the Ding Cooperation. The tender price was $1.7 billion, but some years later, say for the Stonecutters Islands project, it was much later. It was after the peak, but still the cost was as much. No, answer this. Are you not going to come back again after this proposal? Well, we have already awarded most of the contracts. There are just a few smaller contracts to be awarded, so we're rather confident. But of course, there could be unforeseen situation which we cannot control.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I have to apologize because I was late for this meeting. Because in the CIC, I had to chair an advisory meeting. In the past few years, with more trainees in our training programs. But of course, they may not be at the level that we mentioned just now, because for the VTC programs, they may be at a different level. It should be the VTC, not the CIC. Well, just now, our colleagues mentioned the labor importation schemes. Yes, at the moment we have a supplementary labor importation scheme. But then the industry said that the vetting time was very long, very often up to more than 6 months, and in certain cases it took 18 months. And for special job types, which Hong Kong does not have, then if you complete vetting only in 18 months' time, some workers have already found jobs elsewhere. So I'd like to know what the Development Bureau has done to shorten the vetting time. Whether or not you are reasonable is another matter, but at least it won't take so long. Maybe it has nothing to do with the LAB. Maybe it has something to do with administration only. Now, this morning, we discussed the Central Wan Chai bypass, and now we're discussing Liantang, Heung, Yuen. Prices rose because of uncertainties during the investigation period, and as works became more complicated, price soared. I'm from the engineering sector. Such occasions are very common. Rock condition investigation is investigative in nature only. You won't be able to obtain all data. So you have to have contingency fees. The question now is whether or not the contingencies back then were sufficient to address the poor ground condition. Now, you mentioned the 70% conditions. How much were caused by the poor ground condition? How much caused by an upsurge in construction cost? Well, Mr. Chairman, the Development Bureau and the CIC had compiled guidelines and information for the industry. They can be found on the CIC website. That is for what job types, what information should be considered. Well, you have not addressed Dr. Lo-Ai Kwok's remarks. Maybe you should talk to him on another occasion. Due to time constraint, let's stop here. I'd like to ask members whether or not they support the various funding proposals in the paper. Do you support the administration going to the PWSC for funding? Those in favor, please raise their hands. 1, 2. 2 in support. Any objections? How many? Ten abstentions. 1. So this panel does not support the funding proposals in the paper. How many votes, Mr. Chairman? 10 opposing, 2 in favor, 1 abstention. Any other business? If members don't have other businesses to raise, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.